I grew up believing my birth mother was a ghost in my story, a name on a hospital file, a woman who disappeared the day I was born. My adoptive parents gave me love and stability, but inside me lived a quiet ache. Why wasn't I enough to keep? If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me come back and tell you why I'm here, and don't miss my other stories. Years later, while preparing a photo display for my adoptive mother's 60th birthday, I stumbled upon an old envelope at a thrift store, one marked with a familiar date. Inside were wedding photos of a smiling bride, my mother, but the name printed on the back wasn't hers. It was a false identity. Standing beside her was a man I recognized, my former boyfriend from college. The discovery unraveled everything I thought I knew. I began to dig birth records, legal archives, social media trails, and learned that my biological mother had built an entirely new life under another name, hiding her past, her child, and even her age. My shock turned to fury when I realized she'd married someone who once shared a piece of my own story. When I finally confronted her, she broke down. She confessed that she'd been 17, forced by her conservative family to give me up. After years of shame, she reinvented herself to escape the whispers. She never imagined our lives would cross again, let alone through love. The confrontation shattered both of us, but slowly we began to talk. What began as anger softened into something more complicated: grief, understanding, and fragile forgiveness. I met her husband, told him the truth, and together we faced what she had buried for decades. In the end, I didn't gain the mother I'd imagined, but I found a woman who had carried silent guilt longer than I'd been alive, and I found peace in letting go of the question that had haunted me since childhood. Why wasn't I enough? I learned that sometimes forgiveness isn't about absolving the past. It's about freeing yourself from it. I knew the bride by her smile before I knew her by her name. It happened on a Tuesday that smelled like dust and orange cleaner. I was crouched on the cold tile floor of a thrift shop, elbows deep in a rolling bin of old frames, thinking about balloons, playlists, and whether my mother would cry when we played her slideshow. She cries at commercials, soft, grateful tears that make you want to hug her, and this was her 60th. I wanted the photos to feel like a warm kitchen, cluttered, familiar, full of light. A silver frame flashed in the pile. I fished it out and found it empty, the glass intact and faintly greasy. Beneath it, a yellowed envelope peeked out one of those cheap pharmacy print sleeves with a date scrawled in blue ink across the flap. June 12, no year. The ink had feathered into the paper, and someone had pressed hard when they wrote it. The indents were deep enough to catch on my fingernail. I almost tossed it aside. Instead, I slipped a finger under the flap and pulled. The smell hit, first sweet and stale, like old perfume trapped in a drawer. Then the weight, thick, glossy paper that had kept its dignity. I slid the photos into my palm, and there she was, smiling at me from a church doorway draped in white tulle. The bride. Dark hair swept low, a bouquet of pale roses, the kind of careful happiness that turns the corners of your mouth soft. The angle tilted as if the photographer's hands were shaking. 2 more shots. Her veil caught on the breeze, a hand fastening a pearl bracelet to her wrist. A 4th. The groom, just beyond her shoulder, laughing. My breath snagged. The groom's laugh, frozen mid-crinkle at the eyes, was so startlingly familiar that my mouth went dry. But it was the bride who held me. Because smiles age, but they don't change their bones. People can dye their hair, swap out their clothes, polish or dull themselves in every possible way, but the geometry of joy that belongs to you. And I knew that smile. I had seen it in a mirror I never owned. There was a name stamped on the back of one photo in ink. Neat and formal. The kind you'd type if you wanted to be taken seriously. Evelyn Hart. Not a signature. A label. The kind you add when you intend to tuck a life away neatly and hope no one peeks. A strand of hair fell into my eyes. I pushed it back with the back of my wrist, careful not to smudge the prints. The overhead fluorescent hummed a single note that made the room feel distant. A cashier laughed from somewhere behind a rack of winter coats. The world went on, inhaling and exhaling. I stayed kneeling, photos trembling in my hand, while my heart recognized something my brain didn't yet have words for. "Find anything good?" The cashier's voice leapt over the racks. I closed the envelope slowly, like putting a bird back into a nest. Maybe," I said. "Some frames." I paid for the frames and the envelope because it felt wrong to put the photos back, wrong to tuck them into someone else's Saturday. I slid them into my tote bag, between a roll of curling ribbon and a pack of adhesive corners, and drove the long way home. The road was a ribbon through a neighborhood of modest porches and big oaks. It had rained early that morning. The pavement still wore darker patches where puddles lingered. A boy on a scooter, knees dirty, zipped past the corner where the bakery stood. I could have turned right. Instead, I kept straight, windows cracked, the air cool against my face. In the cup holder, a receipt from the party store had curled into itself. 60th gold theme was written in my handwriting along the top. My playlist hummed an old Sam Cooke song that always makes me think of Sunday pancakes. I turned it down until it was just a suggestion of sound. At home, the house breathed its gentle, lived-in rhythm. The clock in the hallway, counting heartbeat seconds. The refrigerator motor taking a slow, low sigh. The faint lemon of floor cleaner mixing with coffee from the morning. I dropped my bag on the dining table and lined up the frames like flat soldiers. Light from the window laid a gentle square across the table, dust motes wobbling through it lazily. I live alone. People imagine loneliness when I say that, but my solitude is a room I made myself. A quiet I choose. A bed I stretch in diagonally. Shoes by the door like small, obedient boats. There are plants that lean toward me when I talk to them. There are 2 chairs at the table because hope is a habit, not because anyone sits in the other one. My mother, my adoptive mother, calls most evenings and asks what I ate. A real meal, I hope, she says. Not cheese and crackers. Sometimes it is cheese and crackers. I don't tell her. I set the tote on the chair and sat down. The envelope made a dry, papery whisper as I pulled it free. I laid the photos side by side, lined their edges up like puzzle pieces, even though they weren't. The bride's face was angled differently in each, but the smile had the same architecture. A curve, my body remembered. The name on the back, Evelyn Hart, sat there, calm as a closed door. My name is Grace. I am 34 years old. I was adopted at birth. The file says my mother was 17. It says she wanted to hold me just once, and they let her. It says she whispered a name and changed her mind. It says she left before sunrise. There is a line in the report that reads, "The mother does not wish to be contacted." When I was little, I used to imagine that line like an iron gate, heavy and unopenable. I was a practical child. I learned to stop throwing my shoulder against it. Instead, I grew up inside a house with a big eat-in kitchen and a pantry that always had extra peanut butter, just in case. My father, my adoptive father, taught me how to check the oil in a car and how to read a map that folded wrong no matter how hard you tried. My mother kept index cards of recipes in her mother's looping cursive, stained with vanilla and butter. There is a photo of me at 8, standing on a stool to stir something in a blue bowl. My hair is too long, the ponytail slumped, my hairline wet with concentration. We didn't have much money, but we had gratitude for our enoughness, and that felt like wealth. On birthdays, my mother would tell the story of the day they brought me home. She would say, "I wore the green dress," and my father would nod like a man who has been rescued from a story by someone brave. "You didn't cry," she'd add. "You looked at us like you were filing us away." She would laugh. I would laugh. Inside me, there was a small, quiet place that never laughed. It wasn't unhappy. It was careful. The place where a line in a file lived like weather. When I was 19, I dated a boy named Matt for 1 year and 6 days. He had sandy hair and those eyes that go light when they're thinking. He liked black coffee and old movies and could listen without checking the clock. We met in the student union over a volunteer sign-up sheet. He wrote his name neatly. I wrote mine with a small flourish at the end, as if trying to convince myself I was more confident than I felt. When we broke, it was gentle, the kind of parting that leaves a bruise, not a scar. We didn't ghost each other. We drifted back into our separate current. None of that was on my mind as I studied the photos. Not yet. At first, all I had was the hum of the house and the way the bride's smile balanced delicately on her face, like something practiced. There was love in it. There was hope. There was also a carefulness I recognized in myself when I'm trying not to want too much. I turned one photo over. The ink stamped on the back stared up at me. Evelyn Hart. It did not belong to me. It did not belong to the baby in the file, to the girl who took apart toasters to see how they clicked, to the woman sitting at a table with a tote bag of frames and ribbon. But I felt it tug at something threaded through me from a place before memory. The kettle clicked off on the stove. I don't remember turning it on. I stood, steadied a hand on the table, and crossed to the kitchen. The tile was cool. I made tea I didn't drink, cupping the mug for its heat. A finch landed on the railing outside, head cocked as if he'd come to eavesdrop. My phone buzzed. Mom glowed on the screen, a contact photo of her in a sun hat, freckles bright. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. "Hey, baby," she said. "Are you still out? I was going to ask if you found those frames. Nothing too shiny, remember. Classy, not disco." I laughed. "I found frames," I said. "And something else." "Oh?" The word lightened, curious. "Like what?" I looked at the photos and felt, very suddenly, protective. Not of the woman in the white dress. Of my mother's soft heart, which has never been anything but open to me. "I'll show you later," I said. "You'll like it." "You sound far away," she said gently. "I'm here," I told her, and meant it. "I'm just tired." She told me about the church lady's plan for the dessert table and how June had offered to bring lemon bars but never measures the sugar right. She asked if I remembered the song I wanted for the opening of the slideshow. I said I did. After we hung up, the house settled back into its soft noises, and the tea cooled untouched. I returned to the table and gathered the photos into a neat stack. I slid them back into the envelope, but didn't seal it. My thumb rested along the flap, feeling the grooves of the old handwriting. June 12. The month when roses are brave. The month when the light stretches its evenings. Up close, the bride's face, her face, was not mine. Our noses were different. Our cheekbones lived in different neighborhoods. But the smile, that geometry again, that interesting balance of restraint and joy. I reached for the photo, then stopped, as if touching it too much would smudge what it knew. When the kettle clicked again, ghost muscle memory, I let it. I stood there and listened to the clock and tried to name the feeling that had moved in and sat down without asking. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even hope. It felt like the thin, bright line that appears on the horizon before dawn has fully committed to arriving, not morning, not night, just the promise of a shape the world is about to take. On the back of one photo, in the faintest pencil, someone had written a number in the corner, not a date, a code of some kind, or a studio note. I stared until my eyes went tired and the numbers blurred. I told myself this was nothing, a coincidence, a pretty stranger and her careful smile, a name that didn't matter to me. And yet, my palms prickled, as if the truth was nearby and nervous to be seen. I slid the envelope into the top drawer of the buffet, where we keep the good napkins and candles that smell like Sunday. I closed the drawer slowly, heard it catch, and then settle. The room seemed to exhale. I stood there a moment longer, hands to the edge of the wood, and then I went to the sink to pour the cold tea away. The day went on. I ironed a tablecloth, pressing steam over memories. I arranged the frames by size and laid ribbon in a quiet curve. I opened my laptop to test the slideshow and watched my mother's life flicker through. Her in braces, holding a terrarium, her in a yellow dress, on a hill that looks like a bowl, her with my father, both of them so young that love blushes on their faces like a secret. With each slide, the ache and the gratitude took turns in my chest. Neither won. They just learned, as they always have, to stand beside each other and share the view. That night, after the dishes were done and the lights were off, and the street outside had gentled into a hush of tires and late walkers, I lay on my side and watched the shadow of the curtain lift and fall with the breeze. I told myself that maybe I would forget the envelope by morning. But my body already knew what my mind didn't want to admit. Some doors don't open with a bang. They open the way dawn does, quietly, persistently, like light insisting kindly on being let in. And somewhere, filed under a name that was not hers, the woman who had once held me for a minute lived a whole life that had nothing to do with me. For the first time in years, I dreamed in snapshots. A veil caught in the wind, a hand fastening pearls, a man laughing with his eyes. When I woke, the first thing I thought was not, "Who is Evelyn Hart?" It was, very softly, "How long have I been waiting to ask?" I didn't forget the envelope. I tried to the same way you try, to forget a sound that startles you awake in the dark. But forgetting isn't erasing. It's only turning your face from the light and hoping it stops shining. 3 days passed before I opened the drawer again. It was a quiet Sunday, the kind of morning where the house feels suspended in air. I'd spent the early hours polishing silver trays for Mom's party, half watching a rerun of The Golden Girls. My hands were busy, but my thoughts kept circling back to that faint blue ink. June 12. That evening, when the house had gone still, I sat at the table again. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and the faint wax of birthday candles. I took out the envelope, feeling the same tremor of curiosity and guilt. The guilt was heavier. I pulled the photos out one by one. There was something new I hadn't noticed before a faint watermark in the lower corner of one picture. Harper's Studio, Maplewood Avenue. Maplewood was 15 minutes from where I lived. My heart thudded. Not fast, just heavy, like footsteps in an empty hallway. I told myself it was silly, that this was probably nothing more than coincidence. But curiosity is its own kind of hunger. It doesn't starve easily. The next day, I drove to Maplewood. The sky was washed out blue, the color of porcelain. The street was lined with narrow brick shops, half of them with for lease signs. Number 214 was still there. Harper's Studio. The sign was faded, the glass door streaked with dust. A handwritten note was taped crookedly inside, closed permanently. For inquiries, call 555 to 9832. I stared at the note until my reflection blurred behind the glass, the faint shape of a woman searching for someone she'd never met. I dialed the number. It rang and rang. On the fifth tone, an elderly voice answered. Harper residence. Hi, my name is Grace, I said, my voice steadier than my hands. I found some photos marked with your studio's name. I was wondering if you might remember who took them. They're old wedding photos, dated June 12. A pause. Then a soft, slow exhale. June 12? The woman repeated, her voice thinning with memory. My husband took those. God rest him. He kept all his ledgers, wedding records too. He loved dates. I swallowed. Would you mind if I came by? I could show you the envelope. Another pause. Well, I don't usually entertain strangers, she said, but you sound kind. Come by around 2. The address is on the note. At 1:58, I stood on her porch, holding the envelope like a fragile secret. Mrs. Harper was small, with silver hair pinned into a bun so precise it seemed drawn there. She led me into a living room that smelled of lavender and old books. A ticking clock on the mantel filled the quiet spaces. She opened a binder thicker than any Bible I'd ever seen. Each page was dated neatly. Her fingers, veined and careful, flipped to June 12. Ah, she murmured. Evelyn Hart and Matthew Dawson. Lovely couple. That day was bright, I remember. We shot it at St. Mary's Church. The name struck like a small hammer behind my ribs. Matthew Dawson. Matt. My Matt. The boy who once painted my dorm wall blue because I said it, reminded me of the ocean. The boy who kissed me under the campus oak and promised we'd always know how to talk to each other, even if we ever stopped being us. I must have gone still, because Mrs. Harper frowned. Are you all right, dear? Yes, I said automatically, but my voice was an echo. The world shifted not violently, but quietly, like the earth deciding to tilt a few degrees without telling anyone. Did they order more prints? I asked, my throat dry. She squinted at the ledger. No, just the basic package. Lovely woman, polite, a bit nervous, I think. I thanked her, left a donation for her time, and walked back to my car with my pulse thudding in my ears. Outside, the afternoon light had turned the street gold, but everything felt wrong in color, too sharp, too bright. Matthew Dawson. He'd married a woman named Evelyn Hart. And Evelyn Hart looked just like the woman I'd seen once, in the mirror of my imagination, the mother I'd never met. I drove home without turning the radio on. The silence felt crowded. That night, I pulled out my adoption file. The pages were creased from years of being read like scripture. Under Mother's Information, a name was printed in faded type, Elena Harper. I compared the names, whispering them into the air like an incantation. Elena Harper, Evelyn Hart, just 2 letters apart. I sat there for hours, tracing the ink of one name, then the other, until dawn began washing the walls pale. When light filled the room, the truth was unbearable and simple. My birth mother hadn't just changed her life. She had changed her name, and somehow, in the cruel geometry of fate, she had married the man I once loved. I wanted to laugh, but the sound that came out was something else, a brittle, startled breath that cracked into silence. For 3 days, I did nothing. I went to work, smiled when spoken to, answered emails that didn't matter. But under the surface, everything inside me was rearranging itself, like a puzzle being forced into new shapes. I would look at faces in the grocery store and wonder, do they know? Could they see it on me? The absurdity, the sadness. The envelope stayed on my table. Each time I passed it, I felt it watching me, patient, certain. Finally, on the 4th night, I called Matt. His voice came through the speaker, warm, easy, familiar. Grace? Wow, it's been years. How are you? I'm fine, I lied. I just needed to ask you something. You're married, right? A pause. Then a soft laugh. Yeah, I am. 5 years now. To Evelyn? He hesitated, surprised. Yeah. Wait, how do you know that? My pulse quickened. I came across something. Old photos. From your wedding. Silence. Then cautious. Grace, what's this about? I took a breath, steady but shaking inside. I think I know who she really is. The line went so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the connection. Grace, he said slowly, you're scaring me. I'm scaring myself, I whispered. Can we meet? Tomorrow? He hesitated. Then, all right. Same cafe near campus? Same cafe. When I hung up, my hands were trembling. I pressed my palms together to still them. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, slow, distant. The kind that doesn't warn you of rain. It just reminds you that storms have memory. And for the first time since I found those photos, I wasn't afraid of what I might learn. I was afraid of what I might already know. The cafe hadn't changed. The same chalkboard menu, the same soft hum of espresso machines, even the same flickering light above the corner table, the one we always avoided because it buzzed like a wasp trapped behind glass. I arrived early. My hands were restless, so I kept folding the napkin on the table halves, then quarters, then smaller still, until it felt like I was trying to control something, anything, that could fit inside my palms. When Matt walked in, time folded too. He looked older, but in that quiet, settled way, laugh lines deeper, hair shorter. The kind of aging that comes from contentment, not struggle. He smiled when he saw me, and for a heartbeat, I forgot why I'd asked him here. Grace, he said, pulling me into a hug that felt both strange and painfully familiar. It's really good to see you. You too, I managed. My voice didn't sound like mine. He sat across from me, ordered a black coffee like he always used to, and leaned forward, studying my face. You look the same, he said softly, maybe a little wiser. I smiled weakly. You got married, I said, as if it were a small thing, a casual detail. I did, he said, his face lighting up for a moment. She's incredible, Grace. Strong, kind, a little mysterious sometimes, but in a way that makes you want to know more. That word mysterious hit differently now. I took a breath. How did you two meet? At a fundraiser, he said, stirring his coffee, though he never used sugar. She was volunteering for a women's literacy group. I remember she had this calm confidence, like she'd lived 100 lives already. I felt like she saw right through me. I nodded. My throat felt tight. How long have you been married again? 5 years. We've been through a lot, but she's steady, you know? The kind of person who doesn't talk about her past much, but you feel it. Like the ocean beneath calm waves. I stared down at my hands. My knuckles had gone white. Matt, I said quietly, do you know her real name? He frowned. What do you mean? I whispered, her real name. Before Evelyn Hart. He stared at me for a long moment, confusion flickering across his features. Then a hint of something sharper, defensive. Grace, what are you talking about? I reached into my bag and slid the envelope across the table. These are your wedding photos, I said. I found them at a thrift store. Look at the handwriting, the date. He picked up one photo, turned it over. His face softened with nostalgia, then froze when he saw the name printed on the back. You think she lied about her name? He asked, his tone incredulous. Why would she do that? Because she's not Evelyn Hart, I said. She's Elena Harper. His eyes flicked up to mine, startled. How do you... Because, I said, my voice breaking, That's the name of the woman who gave birth to me. Silence, thick and absolute. For a few seconds, neither of us breathed. The cafe noises the grinder, the hiss of milk steaming. A doorbell chiming faded until all that existed was the sound of my pulse thudding in my ears. Matt's mouth opened, closed. His fingers flexed around the photo like it might burn him. "Grace," he said finally, "that's impossible." "It's not," I whispered. "I checked the studio records, the date, the address. She changed her name, Matt. My mother, the woman who gave me up at birth, married you." He shook his head slowly, disbelief bending his features. No, that's God. That's insane. You're saying my wife is your mother?" "Yes." He stood up abruptly, chair scraping the floor. A couple nearby turned to look. He lowered his voice. "Grace, do you hear yourself? That's beyond coincidence. You can't know that." "I do know," I said, quietly but firm. "I have proof. I found her birth records, the adoption file, her age matches, her name change, even the handwriting on that envelope." He sank back into the chair, face pale. Jesus. Neither of us spoke for a long time. I could see the tremor in his jaw, the way his thumb ran over his wedding band again and again, like he was trying to erase it. Finally, he said, "She told me she couldn't have children, that she'd lost someone, but she never said who." My breath caught. He looked up at me, eyes glassy. "I thought she meant a miscarriage. She cried when I asked. She said the loss was too old to name." The words hit like stones dropping into water, slow and deep. I whispered, "She was talking about me." He leaned back, exhaling hard. My God. The silence between us felt alive, not empty, but pulsing, shifting with everything neither of us could yet say. "Does she know?" he asked finally. "I don't think so," I said. "Not yet." He looked down at the photo again, the one where she was smiling at him, veil caught in the wind. "What are you going to do?" I didn't have an answer. I left the cafe before the coffee cooled, the bell above the door tinkling softly as I stepped out into the gray light. The air smelled of rain. That night, I sat in my car outside their house. I told myself I was only passing by, but I parked anyway. Their porch light glowed amber through the drizzle. I could see silhouettes through the curtain, the slow rhythm of domestic life. Two figures moving through a kitchen, the soft exchange of gestures that used to belong to me in another lifetime. I watched him, my ex-boyfriend, her husband, hand her a mug. She smiled. That same careful smile I'd seen in the photo, the one that curved just like mine. The realization hit not like thunder, but like the quiet before it, heavy, electric, waiting. I should have driven away, but I didn't. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't wondering why she left me. I was wondering who she became after she did. When I finally turned the key and drove off, my chest ached in ways I couldn't name, not just from betrayal, but from something stranger grief, for the years that had built themselves without me. That night, I dreamed of two women standing in front of a mirror, one older, one younger. Their reflections blurred into each other. One whispered, "I had to survive." The other answered, "So did I." When I woke, I knew what I had to do next. I wasn't going to call her. I was going to stand at her door. And this time, she would have to see the face she'd spent 34 years trying not to remember. It was a Wednesday morning when I finally drove back to the same house I had parked outside days before. The air was heavy with that pre-rain stillness, the kind that feels like the world is holding its breath. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles went white. My heart was beating too fast, too loud. Every time I blinked, I saw her face not as a stranger in a photo, but as the woman who had once held me for a minute, and then let go. The street was quiet. Her house stood at the end of the cul-de-sac neat garden. Blue shutters, a wind chime shaped like seashells clinking softly in the breeze. It looked like the kind of place where peace had finally found someone and decided to stay. I sat there for almost 10 minutes. The rain started in small dots on the windshield, tapping lightly, like it was urging me forward. Then I stepped out. Every sound felt magnified, the squelch of wet leaves underfoot, the hum of distant traffic, the nervous rhythm of my breath. When I reached her porch, my hand hovered over the doorbell for a long second before pressing it. The chime echoed inside. Footsteps followed, and then she opened the door. She was smaller than I expected. Her hair, darker than in the wedding photos, fell to her shoulders in loose waves. She wore a cream sweater, her expression calm but cautious, the way someone looks when they're about to meet a ghost they don't know exists. "Yes?" she said softly, her voice low, warm, measured, felt like a sound I had known once but forgotten. "Evelyn?" I asked, though I already knew. She nodded. "Do I know you?" I swallowed. "My name is Grace." Her eyes flickered just slightly, like the faintest tremor of memory brushing against her. "I'm sorry," she said, polite but uneasy. "Have we met before?" I opened my bag, pulled out the envelope. My fingers trembled as I held it out to her. "I found these." She took the envelope carefully, glancing at the name printed on the back of the photo. For a moment, she looked puzzled. Then her face changed the color, draining, as recognition rippled through her. "Where did you get these?" she whispered. "At a thrift shop," I said. "But that's not what matters." Her hands trembled. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I think you're my mother." The silence that followed didn't feel real. It felt suspended, as if even time had stopped to listen. Her lips parted. "What did you say?" I took a step closer. "You're Elena Harper. You gave birth to me 34 years ago. You changed your name to Evelyn Hart, and you never looked back." She staggered back slightly, one hand gripping the doorframe. For a moment, I thought she might deny it. But then her eyes, those dark, trembling eyes, filled with something raw and wordless. "Oh, God," she whispered, pressing a hand to her mouth. "You're her. You're—" Her knees gave a little, and she reached for the wall to steady herself. I didn't move. I couldn't. She looked at me as if the ground had opened beneath her. "How did you find me?" "I wasn't looking," I said. "You found me. Or fate did. I don't even know which is worse." Her tears came silently. "You weren't supposed to. You weren't meant to find me. I wasn't supposed to exist to you, right?" I said, bitterness seeping through. "Just something you erased and started over." Her voice broke. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" I demanded. "You built a whole new life. You even changed your name. And then you married someone I loved. How does that happen, Evelyn? Or should I say, Elena?" She closed her eyes, her chest rising and falling unevenly. "Please, not here. Come inside." Inside, the house was warm, smelling faintly of jasmine tea and something baking banana bread, maybe. The kind of smell that belonged to safety, not secrets. We stood in the living room. A family photo hung above the mantel, her and Matt, smiling, arms around each other. My stomach twisted. She sat down slowly on the couch and gestured for me to sit across from her. For a long moment, she just looked at me as if memorizing every feature she'd once decided to forget. "You look like him," she finally said. "Your father. You have his eyes." I didn't respond. She clasped her hands together, fingers tight. "I was 17. My parents were strict, Catholic. They said I'd shame the family. They sent me away to a maternity home. I wasn't allowed to keep you. I begged them, Grace, I begged. Her voice cracked. The day you were born, they let me hold you once. Just once. You were so quiet. You didn't cry. You just looked at me. I thought if I could remember your face, maybe it would hurt less to let you go. Tears stung my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I wanted to find you, she continued. But by the time I could, the agency said you'd been adopted by a wonderful family. They told me to move on. So I tried. I changed my name. I started over. And then? She looked down, ashamed. Then I met Matt. I didn't know who you were to him. I didn't know anything until now. My throat burned. You had 34 years to tell me. She nodded weakly. I know. I had questions my whole life, I said, my voice trembling. Every birthday, every doctor's visit, every time someone asked about my family's history, I had nothing. Just a blank line where you were supposed to be. Her eyes filled again. I thought if I stayed gone, you'd be happier. You deserved better than my past. Better? I let out a small, broken laugh. You could have written one letter, one word, anything. She flinched as if struck. I was afraid you'd hate me, afraid I didn't deserve forgiveness. I looked at her, really looked, and saw not the woman who'd abandoned me, but the girl she must have been, scared, pressured, alone. For the first time, my anger faltered. She reached for my hand, hesitant. I can't undo what I did, she whispered, but I've thought of you every day, every single day. Her palm was warm, trembling. I didn't pull away, not yet. We sat there, two strangers, bound by blood and regret as the rain began to fall harder outside, drumming softly against the windows. Finally, I spoke, my voice barely a breath. I don't know what this means yet. I don't know if I can forgive you. She nodded slowly. I don't expect you to. I just needed you to know I never stopped loving you. The words sank into the space between us, fragile, impossible, real. Outside, thunder rolled softly, like a curtain closing on the past. And for the first time, I felt the smallest crack in the wall I had built my whole life, not enough to heal, but enough to let the light in. The rain had slowed to a mist by the time I left her house. My reflection in the car window looked pale, unfamiliar, like I'd just stepped out of someone else's story. But I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face trembling, tearful, full of regret that came too late. And behind her, I saw Matt, the man who had once known all my secrets, now living beside the one I was never meant to find. I turned the envelope over in my hands again and again until the paper softened under my fingers. How was I supposed to live with this? What would I do with the knowledge that every part of my past and present had collided in the cruelest way imaginable? By morning, I had my answer. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was truth. For once in my life, I wanted to stop carrying the silence of other people's choices. So I called Matt. He picked up on the second ring, his voice wary. Grace, can you come over? I asked. It's about her. A pause. Then, she told me something last night. I don't even know if I believe it. I think you do, I said quietly, but you need to hear it from me. He agreed. 20 minutes later, his car pulled up outside my house. I watched from the window as he sat there for a long time, his hand pressed against his forehead before finally stepping out. When he walked in, he looked like he hadn't slept either. His eyes were tired, his movements slower, as if the world had suddenly grown heavier on his shoulders. I confronted her, he said as soon as he sat down. She didn't deny it. I nodded, my chest tightening. Then it's true. He ran a hand through his hair. You were right. She's your mother. And the word hung in the air like smoke. He looked at me then, eyes full of something I couldn't name. Confusion, guilt, pity, love, tangled into one impossible knot. I don't even know what to say, he whispered. I married your mother, Grace. He broke off, unable to finish. It's not your fault, I said softly. You didn't know. He shook his head. But it feels wrong, like everything between us was some cruel setup. Maybe it was just fate, I murmured. Twisted maybe, but fate all the same. He leaned back, exhaling. She's broken over it. You should have seen her. She kept saying she never meant to cross paths with you again. I don't think she did, I said. But she did choose to keep hiding once she realized who I was. That's the part I can't forgive. He looked at me for a long time. What are you going to do? I don't know, I admitted. But I can't be quiet about it anymore. Not with her, not with you. I spent my whole life wondering where I came from. Now that I know, it hurts more than not knowing ever did. He nodded, eyes glistening. You deserve the truth, even if it breaks everything. For a moment, the silence between us wasn't cruel, it was heavy, but honest. Two people sitting in the wreckage of something neither of them built, trying to figure out how to walk out alive. When he finally stood to leave, he turned to me at the door. Grace, for what it's worth, I never stopped caring about you. I'm sorry this happened, to both of you. I know, I said quietly, but maybe this was supposed to happen, so none of us have to keep pretending anymore. He nodded, tears barely contained. She's terrified of losing me, but I don't know how to stay without losing myself. I didn't have an answer for that. After he left, the house felt different. Not emptier, just quieter. The kind of quiet that comes after a confession, when truth has finally exhausted itself. 2 days later, the story spilled into the open. My mother, Elena, Evelyn, whatever name she wore now, called me. Her voice was steady but thin. He knows everything, she said. I told him the whole truth. About you, about the past. My breath caught. And? He's staying with his brother for now. There was a pause. Then her voice broke, raw and small. I don't know if my marriage will survive this, but maybe it shouldn't. I've lived my whole life pretending not to be the woman who left her child behind. And now, there's no hiding left. I didn't know what to say. My anger had softened into something else, not forgiveness yet, but understanding shaped by pain. You should stop running, I said quietly. Not for me, for you. She exhaled shakily. I don't know how. Start by saying your real name again. There was a long silence. Then, in a trembling whisper, she said, My name is Elena. And in that small, fragile sound, I heard 34 years of shame begin to dissolve. When word spread among their friends and the church community they belonged to, whispers began. People who once saw her as perfect began to look at her differently. But she didn't hide this time. She called me again a week later. They're talking, she said, but I don't care. For the first time, I can breathe. How are you holding up? I asked. I'm learning, she said softly. I baked banana bread today, the way my mother used to. Maybe I'll bring you some. I smiled faintly. I'd like that. There was a pause, then her voice turned quiet again. Grace, I know this doesn't fix anything, but thank you for not hating me the way I feared you would. I don't hate you, I said. I just don't know how to love you yet. That's enough, she whispered. It's more than I deserve. The next Sunday, I drove past her house again. The window that used to glow with warmth was dark, now Matt's car gone from the driveway. But there was a new pot of daisies by the door. White, simple, hopeful. For the first time, I didn't feel the ache of what was missing. I felt the quiet grace of what was beginning. Sometimes, the truth doesn't destroy a life. It just reveals the one that's been hiding underneath. And maybe that's what this was. A painful, necessary unveiling. When I got home that night, I placed the old envelope on the table one last time. I opened it, looked at the photo, the one where her veil caught the wind, and whispered to the image, "I see you now." Then I slid the photo into a new frame and set it beside a picture of my adoptive parents. Different worlds. Same love. All of it, somehow, mine. Outside, the wind chime on my porch began to sing. And for the first time in years, the sound didn't ache. It just sounded like peace. The days that followed were quiet, not empty, but gentle. Like the silence after a storm that has torn the branches down, yet left the air clean. I started walking every morning, the same path around the lake near my neighborhood, where the water caught the sunrise like glass, and ducks skimmed the edges with small, steady ripples. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking to escape something. I was walking to stay. The anger that had once burned in me had cooled into something more complicated. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. Forgiveness is too big a word to rush. It was something smaller, quieter, a decision to stop letting pain be the only language I spoke. One morning, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Elena. Just a photo, no text. It was a picture of the old church where she'd been married. The one from the photos I'd found. The same steps, the same archway of stone, except now, 34 years later, the flowers had grown wild around it. In the corner of the frame, a small note. "Would you like to meet here?" I hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. Then I typed, "Yes." That afternoon, I parked outside the church. The air was soft with late spring, the kind that smells faintly of cut grass and distant rain. She was already there, standing at the bottom of the steps, her hands clasped together. For a moment, she looked like the girl she must have been at 17, full of fear, full of hope. When she saw me, she smiled, careful, uncertain. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted. We stood there in silence for a while, the wind lifting strands of her hair. "I used to come here sometimes," she said quietly, "not for service, just to sit. I guess I thought, if I prayed hard enough, maybe I'd feel less like a ghost." I looked up at the bell tower, the cracks in the old stone. "You're not a ghost," I said. "You just stopped looking in mirrors." She smiled sadly. "You sound like me when I was your age." "Maybe I am you," I said softly. "The part you left behind." Her eyes shimmered, but this time she didn't cry. "I've spent years trying to rewrite my story," she said. "But maybe it was never mine to rewrite. Maybe it was meant to lead back here, to you." We sat on the church steps. The stone was warm under the afternoon sun. She told me about her life, the years she hid behind the name Evelyn Hart, the small victories that never felt whole, the moments of joy that always carried guilt's shadow. "I always wondered what you became," she said. "Every time I saw a girl with dark hair and steady eyes, I'd think, maybe that's her. Maybe that's my Grace." I listened. I didn't interrupt. There was no accusation left in me, only quiet understanding. The kind that comes when you finally realize your pain isn't special, it's shared. When she finished, I took a deep breath. "You know," I said, "I used to think forgiveness meant pretending it didn't hurt, but I think it just means deciding that the hurt doesn't get to decide who I am anymore." She nodded, eyes soft. "Does that mean you forgive me?" I looked out toward the field beyond the church, where children were laughing, chasing a red kite. "Not fully," I said honestly, "but maybe someday, and that's more than I could have said yesterday." Her lips trembled into a smile. "That's enough for me." A week later, she came to my house for dinner. She brought banana bread again, wrapped neatly in foil, the top golden and cracked. My adoptive mother joined us, nervous, kind, trying to hide the shaking in her hands when she set down the plates. It was awkward at first. Two women, both mothers, sitting across from each other with 34 years of unspoken history between them. But when I told them both, "You raised me in your own ways," the room softened. My mom reached for Elena's hand. "You gave her life," she said gently. "I just got lucky enough to borrow it for a while." Elena cried, then quietly, gratefully. And for a brief, shining moment, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a child. Whole. Months passed. The scandal around her and Matt faded from gossip. They divorced quietly, no drama, no bitterness. He moved away. She stayed. Sometimes she called, sometimes she didn't. We were learning how to exist in each other's lives without rushing the healing. One Sunday, she joined me on my morning walk. The lake shimmered and the air was cool. She said, "Do you think we'll ever be like other mothers and daughters?" I smiled. "Maybe not, but maybe we'll be something different, something honest." She nodded. Honest sounds good. We walked in silence for a while, and then she slipped her arm through mine. Not like a mother holding a child, not like a stranger, but like two women finally choosing to walk in the same direction. That night, I sat by my window, watching the last light fade over the rooftops. I thought about how life has a strange way of circling back, how the things we run from have a way of finding us, softer than before, asking not for punishment, but for peace. I thought about names Grace, Elena, Evelyn, and how sometimes the hardest thing is learning to answer to all of who you are. Then I picked up my journal and wrote, "Forgiveness isn't a door you open once. It's a window you keep clean enough to let the light in." And for the first time in years, I fell asleep without dreaming of loss. When morning came, I brewed 2 cups of coffee, one for me, one for the mother who might stop by later. The sun poured through the window, and the house smelled of warmth and new beginnings. Outside, the world was ordinary again. But inside me, something had quietly changed. The past no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a story, one I could finally tell without breaking. They say some stories end when the truth comes out. But I've learned that the truth isn't an ending, it's a beginning. For years, I thought my life started the day I was adopted, that the woman who gave birth to me was just a shadow in a file, a missing page in a book I could never finish reading. But I was wrong. She was there all along, in the way I flinch when someone raises their voice, in the way I crave silence when I'm hurt, in the shape of my smile I used to think was mine alone. When I found her, I wanted justice. When I spoke to her, I wanted answers. But what I got was understanding. And maybe that's what forgiveness really is, not erasing the pain, but letting it stop defining you. I don't think I'll ever forget the look on her face the first time she said my name. Not the name on the hospital bracelet she left behind. Not the name in the file she signed away. But Grace, the name of the woman I became without her, and somehow because of her. There's a strange kind of peace that comes when you realize your story was never about blame. It was about becoming whole enough to carry both love and loss in the same breath. My mother and I are still learning each other. We don't force it. We don't rewrite it. We just let it be what it is. 2 lives meeting again where they once broke apart. If you've ever lost someone, not to death, but to time, or shame, or silence, I hope you know this. It's never too late to find peace, even if it doesn't look the way you imagined. Sometimes, The person you've been searching for all along is the version of yourself that finally stopped running. Would you have gone to her door if you were me? Would you have opened the past, knowing it might break your heart again? Tell me in the comments. And if my story reminded you that healing can come from the most unexpected places, stay with me for the next one. Because the truth is, every broken story still has another chapter waiting to be written.